He stood on the marble dais, champagne flute raised, his arm draped around his stunning new fiancée. He was the king of his world, celebrating his victory. He toasted to a future built on a past he had callously discarded, a past that included the wife he'd left with nothing but a broken heart and a condescending check. But in the back of the grand ballroom, a shadow shifted. A figure emerged, not in tears or rags, but in a silhouette of power he hadn't seen in years. He thought he had erased her from his life, but he was about to discover she wasn't just a ghost from his past. She was his new boss, and she had just bought his future. The rain fell on the pristine windows of the penthouse apartment in a way that felt like a personal insult. It was a cold, indifferent October afternoon, the kind that mirrored the chill that had settled deep in Madeline Reed's bones. She clutched a mug of rapidly cooling tea, her knuckles white, as she stared at the 2 suitcases standing by the door like monoliths to a dead marriage. They were Italian leather, a 5th anniversary gift from her to him. Now, they were his ticket out. Ethan Vance, her husband of 8 years, straightened his tie in the reflection of the hall mirror. He adjusted the knot with a practiced ease that made her stomach clench. Every movement was precise, confident, and utterly devoid of the warmth she once cherished. He was handsome in that sharp, predatory way that corporate America seemed to cultivate. A jawline that could cut glass, eyes the color of steel, and a smile that could sell sand in the desert. For years that smile had been her son. Now, it was just the baring of teeth. "Everything's in the folder on the counter, Maddie," he said, his voice casual, as if discussing a grocery list. "My lawyer, Mr. Davies, drew it up. It's generous." Madeline's eyes flickered to the thick manila folder. Inside, she knew, was the architecture of her life's demolition. The dissolution of assets, the non-disclosure agreement, the severance check. He was severing her from his life like a non-performing asset. The word generous hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Generous for 8 years of putting her own ambitions on hold? For managing their home, their social calendar, their life, so he could focus entirely on building Vance innovations? For proofreading his proposals until 3 a.m. and celebrating his every win as if it were her own? She finally found her voice, a dry, cracking thing. "Generous, Ethan? Is that what you call it?" He turned, a flicker of annoyance crossing his perfect features. "Don't be difficult, Madeline. This is for the best. We've grown apart." "People do. I'm offering you a clean break, enough to get you started somewhere new." Somewhere new. As if she were a piece of furniture he was paying to have hauled away. The truth was, sitting in the passenger seat of his Mercedes downstairs, a truth with blonde hair, a law degree from a second-tier school, and a ruthless ambition that matched Ethan's own. Jessica Sterling, a junior associate at his company, whom Madeline had hosted at their Christmas party just last year. She had smiled at Madeline, complimented her canapés, and then proceeded to dismantle her life. "We didn't grow apart, Ethan," Madeline said, her voice gaining a sliver of strength. "You climbed a ladder and decided I was too heavy to carry to the next rung." He actually laughed, a short, humorless bark. "Oh, don't be so dramatic. This isn't a tragedy, it's a course correction. You're smart, you'll be fine. You've been managing the household accounts for years. You're great with spreadsheets." It was the most condescending, dismissive praise he could have offered, and it was the final, sharpest cut. Her background was in financial analysis, with a degree from the University of Chicago. She'd been on a fast track at a major investment firm before she'd met him. She'd stepped back willingly, believing in the partnership they were building. He had reduced all of that education, all of that potential, to grate with spreadsheets. He walked over and placed a cool hand on her shoulder. She flinched as if burned. "Look, Jessica and it's serious. We're getting engaged. I wanted to tell you before you saw it on social media." The cruelty of it stole her breath. He wasn't just leaving, he was rubbing her face in her replacement, demanding she absorb the blow with grace and dignity while he walked away unscathed. She looked up at him, her gaze clear and cold for the first time in an hour. The fog of shock was beginning to recede, replaced by a glacial rage. "Get your hand off me." He recoiled, surprised by her tone. "Maddie! Don't call me that," she snapped. "You don't have the right anymore. Take your generous offer and your Italian luggage and get out of this apartment." His face hardened. The mask of civility slipped, revealing the raw contempt beneath. "Fine. Have it your way. But don't come crying to me when you realize what you've lost. The world is a cold place when you're not under my protection." He picked up his suitcases, the expensive leather making no sound on the plush Persian rug. At the door, he paused for one last look. He wasn't looking at her, but through her, already seeing the future he had planned, a future in which she was a footnote. "Goodbye, Madeline." The door clicked shut, the sound echoing in the cavernous silence of the penthouse she was soon to be evicted from. Madeline stood motionless for a long time, the only sound the drumming of the rain and the frantic beating of her own heart. Then, with a strangled sob, she slid down the wall to the floor, the forgotten mug of tea shattering beside her, a fitting metaphor for her shattered life. She wept until she was empty, a hollowed-out shell in a gilded cage built by a man who had just flown free. But as she sat there amidst the shards of porcelain and the ruins of her marriage, a tiny, hard kernel of something new began to form in the pit of her stomach. It wasn't hope, not yet. It was something colder, harder, and infinitely more durable. It was resolve. Ethan thought he was leaving her with nothing. He was wrong. He was leaving her with a motivation more powerful than any love she had ever felt for him. The burning, all-consuming need to prove him wrong. The first month was a blur of logistics and humiliation. Madeline moved out of the penthouse and into a small, sterile apartment in a neighborhood she didn't recognize. The furniture was cheap, the walls were thin, and the view was of a brick wall. She met with Ethan's lawyer, a man named Davies with reptilian eyes, who slid the final divorce papers across a mahogany table with the air of a bored executioner. She signed them without reading the fine print again. She knew what they said. They said she was no one. The check Ethan had called generous felt like blood money. It was enough to live on for a year, maybe 2, if she was frugal. It was a pittance compared to the wealth she had helped him build. But she deposited it, not as a lifeline, but as seed capital. For 2 weeks, she did nothing but exist. She slept. She ate takeout from cartons while standing in the kitchen. She watched the brick wall outside her window. She allowed herself to grieve, to feel the full, crushing weight of the betrayal. She let the anger and the pain wash over her in waves until she was numb, saturated with it. And then, one morning, she woke up and the numbness had been replaced by a chilling clarity. Ethan's parting shot echoed in her head. "You're great with spreadsheets." He meant it as an insult. She would turn it into a weapon. That day, she retrieved a dusty box from the back of her new, cramped closet. Inside were her old university textbooks on quantitative finance, corporate valuation, and market analysis. She opened one, the scent of old paper and ink filling her small apartment. It felt like coming home. Her first call was to Robert Chen, her mentor from her pre-Ethan life. Robert was a managing director at a rival investment firm, a sharp, no-nonsense man who had been deeply disappointed when she'd left her career to marry Ethan. "Madeleine Reed," he said, his voice a mixture of surprise and warmth when she called. "I was sorry to hear about you and Vance. The man's a fool." "He is," Madeleine agreed, her voice steady. "Which is why I'm not calling for sympathy, Robert. I'm calling for a job." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Maddie, you've been out of the game for 8 years. The markets, the algorithms, they've changed entirely." "I know," she said, her knuckles white as she gripped the phone. "I'm not asking for a senior position. I'll start at the bottom. An intern, a junior analyst, I don't care. I'll work harder than anyone you've ever seen. I just need a door to open." Robert was silent for a long moment. He remembered the brilliant, hungry young analyst she had been. "There's a 6-month contract for a junior data analyst. It's a grind, long hours, terrible pay. It's beneath you." "I'll take it," she said, without hesitation. The next 4 years were a brutal, relentless climb. The junior analyst position was indeed a grind. She was older than her colleagues, who saw her as a curiosity, a divorced housewife trying to play in the big leagues. They underestimated her. That was their first mistake. Madeleine worked with a single-minded ferocity that bordered on obsession. She was the first one in the office, and the last one to leave. While her younger colleagues were out socializing, she was devouring white papers, studying market trends, and teaching herself new coding languages for financial modeling. She didn't just relearn the game, she mastered its new rules. Her old skills, honed by years of managing complex household finances and Ethan's social investments, had not disappeared. They had simply been dormant. Her ability to see patterns, to analyze risk, and to cut through emotional bias to the hard data was sharper than ever. She saw the market not as a series of numbers, but as a story of human fear and greed, a story she had recently learned firsthand. Robert Chen watched her with quiet approval. He saw the fire in her eyes, the same fire he'd seen nearly a decade ago, now refined into a controlled burn. He promoted her from her contract position to a full-time analyst. Then, to senior analyst, she completed her CFA certification in record time, scoring in the top percentile globally. But she knew it wasn't enough. To truly compete at the level she was aiming for, she needed more. On top of her 70-hour work weeks, she enrolled in an executive MBA program at Columbia. Her life became a Spartan existence of work, study, and sleep. There were no vacations, no dates, no social life to speak of. Her fuel was black coffee and a cold, simmering rage that she channeled into every financial model and every case study. During her MBA, she specialized in corporate restructuring and acquisitions. It was here she found her true calling. She had a genius for identifying undervalued or mismanaged companies, companies that looked strong on the surface but were rotting from the inside. Companies, she often thought, much like her marriage had been. It was during a networking event for her program that she met Arthur Pendleton. He was the aging but still formidable chairman of the board for a massive private equity firm, Sterling Hathaway Holdings. They were known for acquiring promising tech companies, streamlining their operations, and maximizing their value. Pendleton was impressed by her incisive questions and her deep understanding of their portfolio. He offered her an internship, which she somehow managed to squeeze into her impossible schedule. At Sterling Hathaway, she wasn't just good, she was a prodigy. She identified a critical flaw in the valuation of a company they were about to acquire, saving the firm nearly $100 million. After she graduated, Pendleton didn't just offer her a job. He created a position for her in his own executive office as Director of Strategic Acquisitions. She was his right hand, his protégé. She spent the next 2 years flying across the country, dissecting companies, leading negotiations, and building a reputation as a shrewd, relentless, and impeccably prepared executive. She became Madeline Reed again, not Maddie, Ethan's wife. One rainy Tuesday, Arthur Pendleton called her into his expansive corner office overlooking Central Park. He gestured for her to sit, an unusually grave expression on his face. "Madeline," he began, steepling his fingers. "As you know, I'm planning my retirement." She nodded, her heart beginning to pound. "Yes, sir. The board has been deliberating on my successor. It's a contentious decision, but I've made my recommendation, and they've been convinced." He paused, looking at her intently. "We have a problem in our tech portfolio. A company that was once a star performer is now showing signs of significant internal rot. Bloated executive spending, declining innovation, and a CEO who seems more interested in his public image than his company's bottom line. The company is Vance Innovations." Madeline's blood ran cold. She kept her expression a perfect, unreadable mask, a skill she had perfected in hundreds of boardrooms. Pendleton continued, oblivious. "It needs a new leader. Someone ruthless enough to cut the fat, sharp enough to see the path forward, and with the personal drive to see it through. The board has approved my choice. We want you to take over as CEO, effective immediately." She felt a dizzying wave of vertigo, as if the whole world had tilted on its axis. CEO of Ethan's company, the company Sterling Hathaway had acquired a majority stake in 2 years prior, a fact she knew but had compartmentalized, focusing on other aspects of the portfolio. "There's one complication," Pendleton said, leaning forward. "Ethan Vance is a proud man. He won't take this news well. He's also about to merge his company name with his fiancée's, I believe, Sterling. He's throwing a lavish engagement party this Saturday at the Pierre Hotel to announce it to his investors and clients. It's a publicity stunt, mostly." Pendleton slid a thick, embossed invitation across his desk. "I was planning to attend and make the announcement then, a public changing of the guard. But I think it would be more effective coming from you. Let them see their new leader in the flesh. Let there be no ambiguity about who is in charge." Madeline picked up the invitation. Her name wasn't on it, of course. It was addressed to Arthur Pendleton. She stared at the elegant script announcing the engagement of Mr. Ethan Vance and Ms. Jessica Sterling. It felt like a lifetime ago that a different name had been linked with his. A slow, cold smile touched her lips for the first time in years. It wasn't a smile of joy, but of vindication, of destiny. "I agree, Arthur," she said, her voice a low, steady hum of pure, unadulterated power. "I think it's essential that I attend." The penthouse apartment Ethan now shared with Jessica Sterling was even grander than the one he'd shared with Madeline. It boasted a panoramic view of the city, all chrome, glass, and stark white furniture that looked impressive, but was deeply uncomfortable. It was a space designed to be photographed, not lived in. Much like their relationship. Ethan loosened his tie, the knot feeling unusually tight. The past year had been a tightrope walk he hadn't anticipated. On the surface, Vance Innovations was thriving. They'd landed 2 major contracts, and their press was glowing. But beneath the surface, the foundations were cracking. R&D was lagging. Their top engineers were being poached by competitors, and their profit margins were being squeezed thin by extravagant, Jessica-approved expenses. The new marketing wing, the Sterling part of the future, Vance and Sterling, was Jessica's domain, and it was a black hole for cash, producing glossy brochures and social media campaigns that generated buzz but few actual sales. He was counting on the engagement party to be more than a celebration. It was a strategic maneuver. By publicly linking his name with Jessica's, and by extension her family's old money name, he hoped to project an image of unshakable stability. He needed to dazzle the investors, especially the representatives from Sterling Hathaway Holdings, the private equity firm that had bought a controlling stake 2 years ago. They had been patient so far, but he could feel their scrutiny tightening. The upcoming board review was a source of constant, gnawing anxiety. "Is that the seating chart again, darling?" Jessica's voice, manicured and smooth, cut through his thoughts. She glided into the room, holding up 2 shimmering gowns. "The silver Armani or the gold Valentino. I want to look like a queen when we make our announcement." Ethan glanced at the spreadsheet on his tablet, a complex web of anxieties disguised as a seating chart. He had placed Arthur Pendleton, the chairman of Sterling Hathaway, at his own table, a place of honor. "The gold," he said absently. "It's more impactful." "Good choice." She draped the gold dress over a chair and came to stand behind him, her hands massaging his shoulders. Her touch felt possessive, proprietary. "Stop worrying about the party. Everything is perfect. The caterer is the best in the city. The champagne is vintage, and everyone who's anyone will be there. This is our moment, Ethan. The official launch of the Vance and Sterling dynasty." He forced a smile. "You're right. It will be perfect." But a sliver of unease remained. It was a faint, almost imperceptible memory of a different kind of support. He remembered late nights with Madeline, her poring over his financial projections, her sharp mind finding flaws he'd missed, her quiet encouragement feeling like a bedrock beneath him. Jessica offered enthusiasm, but not substance. When he tried to talk to her about the pressure from the board or a new competitor's product launch, her eyes would glaze over, and she'd deftly change the subject to flower arrangements or their summer plans for the Hamptons. "I spoke to my father today," Jessica said, her voice taking on a tone of casual importance. "He's so thrilled. He said he always knew I'd land on my feet after that. Unpleasantness at my old firm." Ethan stiffened. The unpleasantness she referred to was an ethics complaint filed against her for poaching clients, the real reason she'd left her law career to join his company as a marketing consultant. He had made that problem go away, a fact she seemed to conveniently forget. "And did you remember to send an invitation to your ex-wife?" she asked, her voice laced with a sweet, venomous curiosity. Ethan looked up, startled. "Madeline? Why on earth would I do that?" Jessica gave a tinkling laugh. "For closure, darling. To show her how well you're doing. To show her there are no hard feelings. It's the classy, powerful thing to do. Let her see what she lost. Let her see us, happy and successful. It's the final win." He considered it. The idea was petty, cruel, and utterly compelling. He hadn't spoken to Madeline since the day he'd left. He'd heard through the grapevine that she'd taken some low-level job somewhere, just as he'd predicted. She had probably faded back into the anonymity from which he'd plucked her. Sending her an invitation would be like salting a wound, a final, triumphant declaration of his superiority. It appealed to the ugliest part of his nature. "Where would I even send it?" he mused, a slow, malicious grin spreading across his face. "Oh, I have her address," Jessica said breezily. "I had my assistant track it down a while ago, just in case we needed to send her any leftover legal documents." The casual way she admitted to having his ex-wife surveilled should have been a red flag. But to Ethan, it just felt like another sign of Jessica's thoroughness. He pictured Madeline, alone in some drab little apartment, receiving the opulent invitation. He imagined her quiet despair, her bitter jealousy. The thought gave him a dark, satisfying thrill. "All right," he said, pulling up his email. "Let's give her a front-row seat to our future." He typed out a short, condescendingly polite email, attached a digital copy of the invitation, and hit send. He felt a surge of power, of finality. It was the last ghost of his old life, now properly exorcised. Later that evening, as he stood with Jessica on their balcony, the city lights glittering below like a carpet of scattered diamonds, he felt a supreme, unassailable confidence. His beautiful fiancée was on his arm. His name was on the verge of being immortalized in the corporate world, and his past was firmly where it belonged, in the rearview mirror. "To Vance and Sterling," Jessica said, clinking her champagne flute against his. "To us," he replied, kissing her. But as he looked out at the vast, indifferent city, he couldn't shake a tiny, cold flicker in the pit of his stomach. It was the feeling of a man standing on a trap door, admiring the view, completely unaware of the lever being pulled 1,000 miles away. The celebration was set, the guests were invited, and the stage was prepared. But he had fundamentally miscast the star of the show. The email arrived at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. Madeline was in her sparse, functional apartment in a high-rise that valued security over charm. She was reviewing a due diligence report for a potential acquisition in the biotech sector. A tangle of data she was methodically unraveling. The apartment was her sanctuary and her command center, a place devoid of personal artifacts, save for a framed photo of her late parents on her nightstand. There were no ghosts of her past life here. She had made sure of it. The notification pinged, a soft, unobtrusive sound. The subject line was deceptively simple. An invitation. The sender was Ethan Vance. Her heart didn't leap or sink. It simply stopped for a single, frozen second before resuming its steady, disciplined rhythm. For a moment, she thought it might be a legal matter, some loose end from the divorce. She clicked it open. The email was short, dripping with false bonhomie. "Madeline, hope this finds you well. It's been some time. As I embark on the next chapter of my life, I wanted to extend an invitation to my engagement party this Saturday. Jessica and I would be pleased if you could join us to celebrate. I've always wished you the best, and this felt like a chance for a positive new beginning for everyone. All the details are in the attached invitation. Best, Ethan, positive new beginning. Wished you the best." The lies were so bald-faced they were almost comical. This wasn't an olive branch. It was a dagger wrapped in silk. It was a summons to witness his triumph, a command performance for her own humiliation. He wanted her to see Jessica's ring, to hear the toasts to their glorious future, to feel the full weight of what he had deemed her unworthy of. Her cursor hovered over the attachment. With a steady hand, she clicked it open. The invitation bloomed on her screen, a confection of gold leaf and swirling calligraphy. "Mr. Ethan Vance and Ms. Jessica Sterling request the pleasure of your company to celebrate their engagement." The venue was the Pierre, the time, 8 p.m. It was the most expensive, ostentatious, and public way he could possibly have chosen to twist the knife. She leaned back in her chair, the glow of the monitor illuminating her face. There was no pain. The woman who would have been shattered by this invitation had died 4 years ago in a penthouse filled with Italian luggage. The woman reading it now was someone else entirely. She was a creation of spreadsheets, boardrooms, and brutal self-discipline. She was a CEO in waiting. A slow, icy calm washed over her. Jessica's name being Sterling had always been a bitter irony. Now it was a poetic one. They were celebrating the joining of their names, Vance and Sterling, completely oblivious that Sterling Hathaway Holdings, her firm, owned the stage on which they were about to perform. Her phone buzzed. It was Robert Chen. "Did you see the latest quarterly report from Vance Innovations?" he asked, his voice tight with concern. "Ethan's bleeding cash. The spending on his new marketing division is astronomical. The board must be having a fit." "They are," Madeline said coolly, her eyes still on the invitation. "That's why they're making a change." "A change? What kind of change?" Madeline allowed herself a small, dangerous smile. "I just received a personal invitation to his engagement party on Saturday." Robert was silent for a moment, processing. "He invited you? That arrogant son of a—" He caught himself. "Why would you even consider going? What's the point, Madeline? You've already won. You don't need to stoop to his level." "This isn't about stooping, Robert. It's about establishing a clear chain of command," she said, her voice dropping to the low, authoritative tone she used in high-stakes negotiations. Arthur Pendleton was going to announce my appointment as CEO at that party. He thought it would be a powerful statement. "My God," Robert breathed. "But he's agreed to let me do it my own way," Madeline continued. "Ethan and Jessica are throwing this party to project an image of power and stability to their investors. They are creating a public forum, filled with the very people whose confidence they need. They've built the stage, sent out the invitations, and chosen the spotlight. I'm simply going to step into it." "He'll be blindsided. It will be a bloodbath." "It will be a corporate restructuring," she corrected him, her voice devoid of emotion. "He is a liability to the company and a threat to the shareholders' investment. My feelings about him as a man are irrelevant. My assessment of him as a CEO is what matters. This is just an efficient way to handle the transition." But it was more than that, and they both knew it. It was justice, served on a silver platter he had paid for himself. It was the final, definitive closing of a chapter, written in ink of his own making. "Be careful, Madeline," Robert said softly. "Don't let the satisfaction of the moment cloud your judgment for what comes after." "The moment is the point, Robert," she replied. "It's about optics. It's about sending a message not just to Ethan, but to every single person in that room, that the era of vanity and mismanagement at Vance Innovations is over. A new protocol is being initiated." After she hung up, she stared at the invitation again. Ethan had intended it as a final act of cruelty. He had summoned the ghost of his past to witness his glory. He had no idea he had just sent a gilded summons to his own executioner. She opened her closet, bypassing the simple, dark business suits she wore daily. In the very back, preserved in a garment bag, was a single evening gown she had bought for an awards dinner 2 years ago, and never worn. It was a deep, midnight blue, exquisitely tailored, and shimmered under the light like a star-filled sky. It was a dress that radiated power. It was perfect. The Pierre Hotel exuded an aura of old-world opulence. Crystal chandeliers weighing as much as small cars hung from the frescoed ceilings of the grand ballroom, casting a warm, golden light over the city's elite. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and peonies, punctuated by the cheerful clinking of champagne flutes and the low hum of self-important conversation. It was a room built for kings and queens of industry, a stage for the city's grandest dramas. Ethan Vance stood at the center of it all, a beacon of success. His tuxedo was bespoke, his smile was dazzling, and Jessica Sterling clung to his arm, radiant in her gold Valentino gown, a massive diamond winking on her finger. They moved through the crowd like royalty, accepting congratulations and air kisses, their laughter echoing slightly too loud their confidence a brittle, lacquered shell. "Arthur Pendleton's office called," Jessica whispered excitedly into Ethan's ear as they greeted a banking executive. "He's running late, but his car is on the way. He wouldn't miss this for the world." Ethan felt a surge of relief. Pendleton's presence was the ultimate endorsement. With the chairman of Sterling Hathaway smiling upon their union, the investors would be putty in his hands. Tonight was going perfectly. It was his masterpiece, a symphony of power, wealth, and love. He scanned the entrance, a part of him still looking for a ghost. He wondered if Madeline had received his email. He hoped she had. He hoped she was sitting in her tiny apartment, eating a meal for one, imagining this very scene and feeling the sting of her own mediocrity. The thought was a petty but undeniable pleasure. It was then that the doors to the ballroom opened again. A woman stood silhouetted in the entrance, and for a heartbeat, the ambient noise of the room seemed to dip. She was not announced. She did not need to be. She commanded attention simply by standing still. She wore a gown the color of a midnight sky, a stark, elegant contrast to the sea of gold, silver, and crimson in the room. It was cut with an architectural precision that highlighted a strength he had never known she possessed. Her dark hair, which she used to wear long and soft, was styled in a chic, severe bob that framed a face he almost didn't recognize. The soft, accommodating features he remembered were gone, replaced by a calm, formidable composure. Her eyes, when they swept the room, were not wide and wounded. They were sharp, analytical, and missed nothing. Ethan's smile froze on his face. His champagne flute felt suddenly heavy in his hand. It was Madeline. But it was not. It was a stranger wearing his ex-wife's face. Jessica followed his gaze, her brow furrowing. "Who is that? Do we know her?" Then recognition dawned, followed by a cruel, triumphant smirk. "Oh my God, it's her! She actually came! How pathetic! Look at her! Probably spent her last dime on that dress to try and compete." But Ethan wasn't listening. He saw the way a few influential venture capitalists, people he'd been trying to get a meeting with for months, straightened up as she entered. He saw the head of a major tech publication subtly nod in her direction, a gesture of respect. Something was wrong. This wasn't the picture of the lonely, forgotten ex-wife he had so gleefully painted in his mind. Madeline didn't search the crowd for him. She moved with a quiet, unhurried grace, her gaze sweeping the room as if she were performing an environmental assessment. She accepted a glass of water from a passing waiter, ignoring the champagne. An older, distinguished-looking man, whom Ethan vaguely recognized as a board member from a rival tech firm, immediately approached her. They spoke in low, familiar tones. He laughed at something she said. Panic, cold and sharp, began to prickle at the edges of Ethan's triumphant haze. This was not the script. She was supposed to be a wallflower, a pitiable figure that would only serve to highlight his own brilliance. Instead, she was drawing a subtle but undeniable gravitational pull. "I'm going to go say hello," Jessica said, her voice dripping with condescension. "It's only polite to welcome the less fortunate." Before Ethan could stop her, Jessica detached herself from his arm and glided towards Madeline, her gold dress a shimmering banner of war. Ethan watched, his heart thudding against his ribs as Jessica intercepted Madeline near a towering floral arrangement. "Madeline?" Jessica purred, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "I'm so surprised you could make it. It's so brave of you to come. Ethan and I are just thrilled you're here to share in our happiness." Madeline turned to face her. She looked Jessica up and down, her expression not of jealousy, but of mild, clinical appraisal. It was the look one gives a piece of art that is technically proficient, but ultimately soulless. Jessica, Madeline said, her voice calm and even, holding none of the tremor of a woman confronted by her replacement. It's an impressive party. The overhead on an event like this must be substantial. I hope it was budgeted for in the quarterly marketing expenses. The business-like comment threw Jessica completely off balance. Well, it's a celebration, not a business meeting. For some of us, Madeline replied smoothly, everything is a business meeting. At that moment, the lights in the ballroom dimmed slightly, and a man stepped up to the microphone on the small stage. It was not Arthur Pendleton. It was another senior board member of Sterling Hathaway, a man named George Carmichael. "Ladies and gentlemen, if I may have your attention," George began, his voice booming through the sound system. Ethan felt a knot of dread tighten in his stomach. Where was Pendleton? Why was Carmichael making the announcement? "We are all here tonight to celebrate a new union, a joining of two names, Vance and Sterling," George continued, smiling out at the crowd. "And in that spirit of new beginnings, Sterling Hathaway Holdings has an important announcement to make regarding the future leadership of one of its most promising assets, Vance Innovations." A confused murmur rippled through the audience. Ethan and Jessica exchanged a bewildered look. This wasn't part of the plan. "While Mr. Ethan Vance has navigated the company through a period of growth," George said, the praise sounding suspiciously like a eulogy, "the board has decided that for the next phase of its evolution, a new vision is required, a new leader with a proven track record in strategic restructuring and aggressive market expansion." Ethan felt the blood drain from his face. The entire room was silent, every eye fixed on the stage. "Our chairman, Mr. Arthur Pendleton, sends his deepest regrets that he could not be here. He is in fact officially on his retirement holiday as of this morning," George announced. "But he and the entire board are unanimous in their choice for the new Chief Executive Officer of Vance Innovations. She is a woman of formidable talent and unwavering resolve, and we are thrilled to welcome her. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the new CEO of Vance Innovations, Ms. Madeline Reed." George Carmichael turned and gestured, not to the side of the stage, but directly into the crowd, directly at the woman in the midnight blue dress. A collective gasp swept through the ballroom. Every head swiveled in unison. The spotlight, which had been prepared for Ethan and Jessica's triumphant toast, swung across the room and landed squarely on Madeline. She didn't flinch. She simply stood there, bathed in the white light, her expression calm, her gaze fixed directly on Ethan. Jessica Sterling stood frozen beside her, her mouth agape, her face a mask of horrified disbelief. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving her looking garish and pale in her glittering gold dress. For Ethan, the world dissolved into a roaring tunnel of sound. The clinking glasses, the music, the whispers, it all faded away, replaced by the thunderous pounding of his own blood in his ears. He looked at Madeline, really looked at her, and saw not the woman he had left, but the architect of his demise. He had sent an invitation to his party, and she had responded by taking his company. He had planned a celebration of his future, and it had just become the public execution of his career. In the center of the silent, stunned ballroom, Madeline met his gaze across the room. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't a gesture of triumph or malice, it was a gesture of finality, a confirmation. The books were balanced, the debt had been paid, the party did not so much end as it shattered. The announcement hung in the air like the smoke after an explosion, and the guests, a mix of investors, clients, and socialites, reacted with a flurry of frantic whispers. Alliances were reassessed, business cards were discreetly pocketed, and a wide berth was given to the smouldering crater where Ethan and Jessica stood. They had become radioactive. Jessica was the first to break. Her face, a carefully constructed mask of social grace, crumpled into undisguised fury. "What did you do?" she hissed at Ethan, her voice a venomous whisper. "You told me everything was fine. You told me the board loved you." I don't know," Ethan stammered, his mind reeling. He couldn't process the reality of the situation. Madeline. His quiet, unassuming Madeline was the new CEO. It was impossible. It was a nightmare. "You've ruined us." Jessica's voice rose, attracting more stares. "My name is attached to this humiliation. Vance and Sterling? It's a joke!" Without another word, she turned and stormed away, her gold dress trailing behind her like a tarnished banner, leaving Ethan alone in the wreckage of his own making. Madeline, meanwhile, was surrounded. The same venture capitalists and executives who had been giving Ethan polite nods were now eagerly shaking her hand, their voices a low murmur of congratulations and strategic inquiries. She handled them with an unnerving calm, her answers crisp and professional. She wasn't celebrating. She was holding her first informal board meeting. She left without a backward glance at Ethan. She didn't need to. The damage was done, the message delivered with surgical precision. The following Monday morning was grey and foreboding, the sky the colour of concrete. Ethan arrived at the headquarters of Vance Innovations, feeling like a condemned man walking to his own execution. The receptionist, who usually greeted him with a beaming smile, now looked at him with a mixture of pity and fear, her eyes darting away as he passed. The entire office was shrouded in a tense, oppressive silence. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m. in the main conference room, a glass-walled enclosure on the top floor that was nicknamed the Fishbowl. When Ethan entered, the board members were already seated around the long, polished granite table. They avoided his eyes. At the head of the table, in the large leather chair that had been his, sat Madeline. She was dressed in a severe, dark grey suit, her hair pulled back. She looked every inch the CEO. There was no trace of the woman he had married, no hint of shared history in her cool, dispassionate gaze. Before her was a tablet and a single file folder. "Good morning, Ethan," she said, her voice echoing slightly in the silent room. "Please have a seat." The act of sitting down in a subordinate's chair at the table he once commanded was the first of 1,000 small humiliations he would endure that day. Madeline did not waste time with pleasantries. She began the meeting immediately. "Good morning, everyone. As you know, a leadership transition has been initiated by the board of Sterling Hathaway. My mandate is to address the fiscal and operational inefficiencies within Vance Innovations and to steer the company back to a path of sustainable profitability. Let's begin with the Q3 expenditure reports." With a tap on her tablet, the large screen at the end of the room lit up with a series of charts and graphs that were horrifyingly clear. It was a systematic dissection of his failures. She pointed out the spiraling costs of the marketing department, headed by Jessica, showing its negligible return on investment. She highlighted the declining R&D budget, correlating it directly with the loss of 2 key engineers and a critical patent filing that had been beaten to the punch by a competitor. She spoke in a calm, measured monotone, using terms like fiscal irresponsibility, misallocation of resources, and brand dilution. She never once made it personal. She didn't have to. The numbers did it for her. She presented the data not as an accusation, but as an unassailable fact, an autopsy of his leadership. Ethan felt his face flush with shame and impotent rage. He tried to interject, to defend his decisions. The marketing spend was about building brand prestige, he began, his voice sounding weak even to his own ears. The brand's prestige is derived from its innovation and profitability, Mr. Vance. Not the vintage of the champagne served at its parties. Madeline cut him off coolly, not even bothering to look at him. She addressed the board. The party on Saturday evening, for example. I've reviewed the invoices. $250,000, billed to the corporate account as a client and investor relations event. An event, I might add, that resulted in a catastrophic loss of investor confidence. The other board members shifted uncomfortably. They had all been there. They were all complicit in enjoying the largesse. Now they looked at him as if he were a stranger who had stolen their wallets. He was being systematically dismantled, piece by piece, with the cold, impersonal tools of the corporate world he loved. It was a death by 1,000 cuts, each one delivered with the precision of a surgeon. When she was finished, the case against him was absolute. He expected her to fire him. He almost wished for it, a quick, clean end. But Madeline had something far more punishing in mind. Effective immediately, the marketing department will be dissolved, and its functions absorbed by sales and product development, she announced. All non-essential executive perks are suspended. And Mr. Vance, she finally turned her eyes on him, her gaze as sharp and cold as ice. You will be reassigned. A stunned silence filled the room. You will be taking on the role of Vice President of Special Projects, she continued. Your first project will be to personally oversee the liquidation of the assets from the now defunct marketing division. You will report directly to me. Your performance will be reviewed on a weekly basis. It was a master stroke of corporate cruelty. She wasn't firing him. She was demoting him, humiliating him, forcing him to clean up the very mess he had made with his mistress. She was putting him on a corporate leash, forcing him to witness firsthand as she undid all of his work and rebuilt the company in her own image. He would have to sit in meetings and watch her command the respect he had lost. He would have to call her Ms. Reed. He looked around the table for any sign of support, but found only stony faces. He had been utterly and completely outmaneuvered. Do you accept the new role, Mr. Vance? Madeline asked, her tone making it clear it was not a question. He swallowed the bile that rose in his throat. His pride, his ego, his entire sense of self screamed at him to quit, to walk out, and never look back. But he couldn't. His finances were tied up in company stock options that hadn't vested. Jessica, he knew, would be gone the moment the money dried up. He was trapped. Through clenched teeth, he managed to choke out the single word that sealed his fate. Yes. Madeline gave a curt nod, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. Good. My assistant will send you the details of your new office assignment. It's on the 4th floor. The meeting is adjourned. She stood up and walked out of the boardroom without a second glance. The other board members filed out after her, leaving Ethan alone in the cavernous, silent room. He stared at his reflection in the polished table, but the confident, powerful man he expected to see was gone. In his place was a pale, defeated stranger. He had once stood at the top of the world and sneered at the woman below. Now he was at the bottom, looking up, and the view was unbearable. 6 months passed, and spring breathed new life into the city. A similar revitalization was underway at the newly rebranded Innovate Dynamics. The culture of excess was gone, replaced by a razor-sharp focus on results. Madeline was a formidable CEO, leading not with charisma, but with unassailable competence. The company was thriving, its stock price steadily climbing. Ethan, meanwhile, languished. His office was a windowless cubicle on the 4th floor, his title of VP of Special Projects, a corporate joke. He was a ghost, haunting the halls of the empire he'd lost, forced to witness its flourishing without him. Jessica had vanished the week after the party, Her final communication, a text calling him a bad investment. He had lost everything. The inevitable summons came on a rainy Friday. He stood before her in the corner office he once occupied. The space was now minimalist and functional, a reflection of its new occupant. Madeline stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the skyline. "Ethan," she said, turning to face him. Her gaze was not triumphant, but dispassionate. "Your contract is up for review. The board is eliminating your position." This was it. The final, quiet cut. He just nodded, the fight long gone out of him. "There's a severance package," she continued, gesturing to a folder on her desk. "It's adequate." The echo of his own cruel words from years ago landed with a sickening thud. He finally found his voice, the question that had haunted him for months. "Why, Madeline? Was all of this just for revenge?" A thoughtful expression crossed her face. "When you left, you said the world was a cold place without your protection. You thought you were my son. But you were the eclipse, Ethan. You were the shadow I was living in. When you left, you didn't take the light away. You finally let it in." She met his gaze, her voice calm and certain. "I didn't do this for revenge. I did this for me. I did it to become the person I was always meant to be. You just happened to be standing in the way." There was nothing he could say. He had been a villain in her story, but only a minor one. A catalyst, not the cause. His downfall wasn't her goal. It was merely a consequence of her rise. He took the folder and walked to the door. With his hand on the handle, he looked back one last time. She had already turned back to the window, her attention on the sprawling city below, her gaze fixed on the future. He was already a memory. Ethan stepped out of the office and into the anonymous rain, a man erased from his own life, leaving Madeline Reed alone at the top, finally free of the shadows. And so, the story of Madeline Reed and Ethan Vance comes to a close. It's a raw, powerful reminder that the people we discard can often possess a strength we never bothered to see. Madeline's journey wasn't just about revenge, it was about rebirth. She transformed her deepest pain into her greatest power. Not to destroy her ex-husband, but to build herself into someone he could never have imagined. This story shows us that true victory isn't about getting even, but about getting ahead, on your own terms. What did you think of Madeline's ultimate power move? Was it cold-hearted justice, or the most inspiring comeback story? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were moved by this incredible tale of transformation and vindication, please give this video a thumbs up, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more unforgettable stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Click that notification bell so you never miss an update. Thank you for listening.